The sound that woke me was not of this world, though it came through canvas and snow like any common noise. A heavy, wet heaving, close enough to stir the frost from the tent wall over my face. The dogs lay flat, ears pressed back, not growling, not moving. Then, just beyond the lamplight, something black and low slid past, leaving a trail that steamed in the 40 below air. Men have asked me to recount this, though few stay the course of the telling. If you have the patience, mark your approval, leave your thoughts, and follow our further accounts. Such things keep old reports from dying unread. It began 3 weeks earlier, when I still trusted the map more than my own eyes. We set out from Pond Inlet on the 1st of March, 1915, 4 men and 10 dogs over the sea ice. In that grey hour when the sun only skimmed the horizon and refused to commit itself to day. Our objective was plain enough on paper: to survey the floe edge west of Bylot Island for a proposed whaling station and to take soundings along the leads. The Admiralty map laid it all out in blue ink and careful hatching. It did not mark what watched from beneath the ice. I was 28 then, a surveyor in the service of the Canadian government, with a brass transit, a prismatic compass, and more confidence than sense. With me went Captain Harrington, who had wintered twice in Hudson Bay and carried himself as if the Arctic were a difficult but obedient horse MacLeod, a Highlander turned cook and handyman, wide in the shoulders and narrow in patience, and young Desjardins, our interpreter and guide, who had spent his boyhood among the Inuit near Cape Dorset and spoke their language with an ease that pricked Harrington's pride. The first days were hard in the ordinary way. Drift snow, sastrugi like frozen waves, the constant creak of runners, the leather traces snapping against panting flanks. Our equipment was sound: ash sleds bound with rawhide, primus stoves, canvas tents, pemmican and hard biscuit in canvas sacks, rifles wrapped in oiled cloth against the frost. The cold made everything honest. Metal burned bare fingers, breath froze in moustaches, and each mile had to be earned. The men were as one then. In the evenings, once the tent was pitched and the primus roared, we would pass a tin of tobacco, and Harrington would speak of his wife in Halifax, who had promised to wait, and of their girl, born while he had been at sea. MacLeod grumbled of a farm in Nova Scotia that swallowed money and spat out stones, yet his hands moved with a surprising gentleness when he poured tea. Desjardins said little at first, answering questions in brief phrases, eyes always moving, listening to the dogs, the ice, the wind. I remember one such evening, perhaps the 5th of March. The barometer had steadied after a day of wind, and we sat close over the map. I traced our progress with a pencil stub, calculating miles against the Admiralty's neat pairs of figures. Harrington tapped the sheet. "There," he said. "By the 12th, we will be on the floe edge. Whalemen or no, that is work we can be proud of, Price." MacLeod snorted and poked the kettle. "Aye, if the ice minds your schedule." Only Desjardins looked uneasy, but he had removed his outer mitts and was rubbing his fingers close to the stove flame, his eyes on the tent wall where the frost feathers glimmered. "Bylot side," he said quietly in his accented English. "Old people say the ice is different there." Harrington smiled in the tolerant manner of the times. "Ice is ice, lad. It knows no tales." "Some ice listens," Desjardins replied. Then he shrugged, as if ashamed of his own words, and busied himself with the dogs. Had I understood then what he meant, I might have turned back, but the map was clear, the sky outwardly fair, and my mind was full of baselines and triangulations, not tales. The first sign came on the 7th day, a thing so slight that I would have forgotten it entirely had other matters not followed. We had skirted a pressure ridge, its blue teeth jutting 10 feet in the air, and descended into a shallow basin of wind-hardened snow. The dogs slowed of their own accord. There was no wind here, though the gusts still combed the ridge behind us. The air felt heavy, as if pressing upon the ears. I thought at first it was only the shape of the ice, some sheltering quirk, but then I noticed the sound, or rather, the lack of it. The faint groan of the pack ice, which had been our constant undertone, was absent. The distant crack and pop of distant floes, the whisper of blown snow against canvas, all were gone. Our own movements, the creak of the sleds and pant of the dogs, seemed shamefully loud. We crossed that hollow quickly in a silence that weighed upon the tongue. Only when we had climbed back into the wind did normal sound return, along with a curious relief in my chest. I told myself it was nothing, and a mere freak of acoustics between ridges. Yet that night I woke twice, listening for some sound I could not name. On the 9th of March, we found the tracks. We were following a lead that ran west, a ribbon of dark water between the white plains. The ice here had refrozen in places, new and black and treacherous, so we kept a safe distance. It was Desjardins who lifted a hand and stopped us with a soft word to the lead dog. "Look," he said. At first, I thought it was common seal sign, the usual impressions where they hold themselves to breathe. But as I drew closer, my gloved hand tightened around my walking stick. The prints were set in 2 lines, like a great hound's, each pad larger than my open hand, claws scoring the snow. Between them, scored deep, ran a central furrow, as though something heavy had dragged. "Bear," said Harrington, though he did not sound certain. "Bear do not walk like that," said Desjardins quietly. He crouched, studying one print. His face had taken on a peculiar stillness, too long, too narrow. "It is difficult to judge in drifted snow," I offered. "The wind stretches and fills." I examined the distance between the prints, the regularity of the stride. They were aligned with a care that no wind could manufacture. The depth was remarkable. Even a large polar bear, heavy as they are, did not sink so cleanly through the crust. The trail led from our north, straight as a laid rope, down to the edge of the lead, where it simply stopped. There were no return prints, no smudge of disturbed snow beyond. It was as if whatever had walked there had stepped neatly into the black water and been swallowed. MacLeod spat carefully away from the marks. "A bloody thing went for a swim, that is all." I glanced at the far side of the lead. The opposite bank lay a good 30 yards distant, sheer-edged and undisturbed. "Nothing came out," said Desjardins. He turned his face away from us then and murmured softly in Inuktitut, the words low and quick. I caught only one term that I recognized from previous years in the north, spoken with respect just above a whisper. Akhlut. At that, I laughed, though not unkindly. "Come now, Desjardins. We are not in a drum story. There must be some explanation." He rose from his crouch and looked at me. "There is," he said. "You will not like it." We moved on. The trail lay behind us, filed away in my mind as an anomaly, a field note without conclusion. I mentioned it only briefly that evening in my journal, more interested in our rate of progress and the state of the sky. And the wind had died again. The silence around the camp pressed even through the flapping of the tent. In the watches of that night, the sounds began. At first, they were distant, so woven into the natural creaks and sighs that I thought I dreamed them. A splashing far off along the flow edge, a slow, heavy rhythm of something large disturbing water, followed by a dragging, wet slither against ice. The dogs shifted in their sleep, whined once, then fell still. On the second night after the tracks, the sound came closer. I woke with my heart already thudding, as if my body had heard before my mind. Stillness, then a muted thud, as though something heavy had placed its weight just outside the ring of dogs. A wet inhalation, drawn in through wide nostrils, tasted upon the air. I lay rigid in my bag, watching the faint light of the banked stove. The canvas bulged inward slightly, as if pushed by a slow, exploring pressure. Then came a sound I have never forgotten, though years have tried to sand it down. A low, rolling growl that seemed to come from water and throat at once. Not loud, but of a depth that made my teeth ache. The dogs did not bark. They pressed themselves flat, as if each sought to take up less space in the world. In the morning, there was nothing to see but the usual whirls of drifted snow. I kept my own counsel, unsure whether I had dreamed it. The others were tight-lipped over breakfast, hands moving more quickly than usual, as if all desired to be lashed to the sleds and gone. No one mentioned disturbed sleep, but each man's eyes were rimmed red. The rational mind, especially a young one, is a stubborn thing. I told myself that noise travels oddly over ice, that a distant pressure ridge collapsing could mimic breath, that my nerves, stretched by cold and labor, had embroidered common sounds with fancy. Had I not myself written in reports that northern tales grew in the long dark for lack of honest occupation? Yet evidence does not abate for one man's peace of mind. On the 12th of March, according to our plan, we reached the main flow edge. It rose before us like a frozen cliff, the white plain ending abruptly in a jagged wall 2 or 3 fathoms high, beyond which the dark water rolled. The air here was thick with the cries of kittiwakes and the harsh calls of ivory gulls. Seals bobbed in leads, their black eyes like wet stones. For a time, ordinary work drove all else from our thoughts. Harrington took soundings with the lead line, cursing when slush fouled the weight. I set up the transit on a stable hummock and took bearings on distant headlands. MacLeod mended a cracked runner. Desjardins bartered with a small Inuit hunting party that had followed the ice, exchanging tobacco for fresh seal meat and news of the flow. I heard the word again in their quiet, urgent speech. Akhlut. It passed between them like the movement of a shadow, followed by glances at the water's edge and at us. When I asked lightly what creature they spoke of, Desjardins avoided my gaze. Stories, he said. Some say it is a thing that is both in the water and on the ice. They say when the ice is wrong, it comes. And do you believe this? I asked. He considered a moment. I believe the ice, he said at last. I believe what I see. He refused to say more. One of the hunters, an older man with a face carved by years of wind, he approached me and placed a small carved object in my mittened hand. It was made of bone, smoothed by long handling, and shaped like something between a seal and a great dog. He spoke softly. He says you should keep it near, said Desjardins, so it will know you are warned. I tried to laugh, but the sound came out thin. Still, I put the carving into the inner pocket of my parka, more from politeness than conviction. We camped that night a quarter-mile back from the flow edge. The noise of the water reached us, a constant deep mutter under the canvas, but the cries of birds had ceased. That struck me as odd, but fatigue took me quickly, and I slept. I woke to the microshock that split the expedition's easy rhythm. There was a sudden, sharp crack, like a rifle shot directly over my head, and at the same instant the tent tilted, throwing me sideways. The primus, which Harrington had banked low, toppled and went out, plunging us into darkness. I heard MacLeod curse and scrabble for his boots. Outside, the dogs burst into frantic motion, traces snapping, a confusion of yelps and strangled cries. Their voices cut off, one by one, as if a hand had closed over each throat. I fumbled for matches, my fingers thick with cold and fear. Before I could strike one, a shadow passed over the faint glow from the tent door, blotting it entirely, as though something vast had moved between us and the snow. The canvas sagged inwards with a slow, immense pressure. The fabric grew darker where it touched, as if pressed by something wet. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Harrington found his voice. "Out!" he hissed. "Rifles! Now!" The pressure withdrew, leaving the canvas to spring back with a frost shower. I struck a match with trembling hands, cupped it to the primus, and coaxed a thin blue flame to life. The familiar roar steadied me. When we tumbled out, rifles in hand, the world beyond was unchanged in its fundamentals. Stars in a clear black sky, the glow of our own breath, the white plains stretching away. But 6 of the 10 dogs were gone. The remaining 4 huddled close to the sleds, traces tangled about their legs, eyes rolling white. Blood marked the snow in short sprays, not the great smears of a bear's mauling, but neat, almost dainty arcs, as if something had plucked the missing animals up and away in great bites. There were no gouges, no dragging trails, only hoof-deep impressions. That was what I thought in my first confusion, for the marks were long and narrow, set far apart. Desjardins knelt by one of the stains, his face grey in the starlight. "Seal feet," he whispered. "On the ice." MacLeod swore in a low, fervent stream. Harrington stood very still, the rifle barrel lowered. "No man speaks of this in any report," he said finally. "Do you understand? We cannot afford madness in Ottawa's offices." I nodded, though my mind rebelled. Some part of me clung even then to familiar explanations. Perhaps a pressure crack had opened beneath the dogs, dropping them into a hidden lid. Perhaps the marks were distorted in the half-light. Yet in my inner pocket, the little bone carvings seemed to burn against my chest. From that night, the expedition ceased to be a simple undertaking. We were no longer merely men crossing a charted space. We were being measured in turn. The days that followed blurred into a sequence of small alarms. We moved inland, away from the flow edge, yet the sense of being shadowed did not abate. Some nights there were sounds, slow dripping where no melt could be, a rattle as of claws on the sled runners, a low, almost thoughtful grinding that reminded me, absurdly, of a dog gnawing a bone. Other nights there was nothing, and those were somehow worse, for the silence then was absolute, thick as wool, broken only by the small stirrings of our own bodies. The temperature played tricks. Once, while I stood apart from the others taking a bearing, the air about me warmed, just in a narrow band at my shins, as if the breath of some hidden thing laid along the snow. My upper body shivered in the usual cold, but my legs prickled with thaw. I could see quite clearly a low, trailing mist coiling about my boots, though the air beyond was crystal hard and clear. When I stepped back, and the sensation ceased at once, I said nothing. It is remarkable how much a man will conceal from his fellows in order not to disturb the fragile surface of normality. The animals knew. Arctic foxes, ordinarily bold in their hunger, began to appear at the edges of our camp, not to scavenge, but to stand, heads low, watching the darkness beyond us. Then even they vanished. One morning we woke to find the sky full of moving shapes, a ribbon of guillemots and kittiwakes flying inland, away from the ice, their wings whirring in an unending stream. I had never seen such a movement. It was as if the whole shore were emptying itself. "Storm coming," said MacLeod, but the barometer held steady. On the 15th night, the smell came. We had pitched the tent beside a low hummock, the better to break the faint wind. The routine of camp had become stripped to its essentials. We spoke little, moved quickly, and kept our rifles at hand even to drink tea. After supper, I stepped outside to relieve myself. The sky arched overhead, the stars brittle as sugar. No wind stirred. Halfway between the tent and the hummock, my nostrils caught a scent that did not belong to snow, leather, or men. It was a thick, oily musk with an edge of rot, like kelp left too long on the beach over which some animal had dragged its wet hide. My stomach clenched. The smell seemed to hang in a band, invisible but sharp, just at the height of my knees. I could almost see where it lay, a low line across the snow, as if some great body had slid past there, again and again, each time roughening the invisible track. I stared at it, at the empty air, the untouched crust of snow. Now there was nothing to see, yet the stink grew stronger the longer I stood. Behind me, the tent flap stirred. Desjardins' voice came soft. "Price, come in." I obeyed at once. As the canvas closed behind me, the smell vanished, cut off as if by a door. I met his eyes in the lamplight. He knew without my speaking. "You heard it in the water before," he said. "Now it walks more." His English faltered, then found a steadier footing in his own tongue, as he spoke a phrase that needed no translation in his tone. "Akhlut tuktuinak," Akhlut only. Harrington heard and stiffened. "I will have no more of that word," he said sharply. "We are not children around a winter lamp." Desjardins looked at him with a weariness that seemed sudden and very old. "Then give it another name, Captain," he said, "if that helps." Thereafter the thing, or whatever it was, made less effort to conceal its presence. We would wake to find long marks parallel to our route. Not quite tracks, more like lines drawn by a heavy rope beneath the snow crust, visible only where drift had not yet filled them. Once, in the half-light of late afternoon, I glimpsed movement at the very edge of my vision, a low, dark undulation far out on the plain, where no ridge lay. When I turned my head, nothing remained but the familiar white. It was Harrington who saw it first with his full gaze, though he denied it almost before the words left his lips. We were crossing between two minor pressure ridges when he halted so abruptly that the rear sled nearly struck him. His face had gone extremely pale beneath his beard. "By God," he whispered, "did you see that?" "See what?" asked MacLeod. His voice had lost its habitual roughness. Harrington stared out across the ice. I followed his gaze. The surface lay level, the snow riffled by wind. "There," he said, but with less conviction. "Something moving. Low. Black. Like a seal, but too long. It was not. It must have been shadow. There is no sun to cast one so sharp, murmured Desjardins. The day was overcast, the light diffuse, without direction. We are tired, Harrington said, more to himself than to us. The ice plays tricks. That is all. It was not all. The peak of our encounter came 3 nights later, and it has never left me. Even as I speak now, my hands remember the weight of the rifle, the rasp of frozen wool against my cheek, the taste of fear like penny metal on the tongue. We had camped beside a wide crack, a new fracture in the ice that had opened since our outward journey. The lead was narrow, 4 yards at most, its edges razor clean. The water below was an ink that reflected nothing, save for a pale suggestion of our own faces when we peered over in the daylight. The crack ran straight as a road to the limits of sight in both directions. Too wide to cross here, I had said. We must follow it until it narrows. We pitched the tent a safe distance back. Night fell, such as it was in that season, and with it a faint ground fog, hugging the snow like breath held low. The world beyond our small island of lamplight shrank to a ring of grey. I woke in the small hours to a sound that I had heard in softened forms before, now brought close and clear. The slow, definite placement of weight upon ice. Not the crisp, dainty steps of a fox, nor the lumbering shuffle of a bear. This was deliberate, almost measured. Each step followed by a slight, unpleasant squeal as claws, or something like them, gripped for purchase on the hard crust. There was another sound beneath it, a soft slap and suck, as if another set of limbs moved in water just out of sight, keeping pace. My heart pounded so fiercely that it seemed the thing outside must surely hear it. Around me, the others were awake, though none spoke. Breath rasped shallowly in the close air. A faint vibration came through the snow beneath my body, like the tremor of a train passing on a far-off track, though we were 1,000 miles from any rail. The steps circled the tent once, unhurried, pausing occasionally as if to listen. At each pause, the dogs gave a low, strangled whine, cut off at once. Then the sound moved away, toward the crack. Curiosity, that fatal quality in explorers, overcame terror. I eased myself from my bag, careful not to jostle the others, and crept to the tent flap. I saw Harrington's eyes glint under his brows. He made no move to stop me. The canvas was stiff with frost. I raised it the width of my hand and looked out. The fog lay close to the ground, perhaps a foot high, a band of moving grey. Above it, the air was clear, the stars sharp. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, at the very edge of the lead, the fog parted as something passed through it. I did not see a full form, and I thank whatever mercy there is for that. What I saw were fragments, glimpses caught where the low cloud thinned. The arch of a back, slick as wet stone, yet beaded with fine frost. A line of long, jointed limbs, wrong in the angles, bearing weight on broad pads that left no impression I could see, each tipped with something that caught the starlight like wet bone. A thick tail or hind part, dragging just enough to stir the mist in its wake. The head remained obscured, but twice I saw the curve of something like a jaw, too long, too narrow, opening and closing in a slow testing motion, tasting perhaps the air, perhaps our scent. It moved along the edge of the crack with awful sureness, as if the division between water and ice were its native road. As it went, the water at the margin dimpled and swelled, as though heavy bodies moved there in answer, unseen. Once a shape broke the surface, not wholly, just a hint of muzzle and dark eye, then sank again, leaving a ring that rocked silently against the ice. The smell rolled toward me in a wave, heavier than before, filling my nose and mouth until I nearly gagged. That rot sea reek, underscored by a rank mammalian musk, spoke of depths and long unlit places beneath ice. The thing paused opposite our camp. Though I could not see eyes, I felt with a dreadful certainty that it knew exactly where we lay. The fog between us quivered. In that instant, the bone carving in my pocket grew hot, as if pressed to a stove. I flinched, and the flap in my hand rustled. The head turned. For a moment, the fog thinned over that part. I glimpsed not features, but an impression, a long, low profile, somewhere between wolf and seal, studded with coarse, wet hair that froze in needles at the tips. A line of teeth, very white, very many, irregular as a broken comb. Then the mist closed again, as if drawn deliberately over it like a veil. The growl that followed seemed to come from the crack, from under the ice, and from just outside the tent all at once. It pushed at the air in my lungs. My fingers went numb on the flap. Behind me, I heard MacLeod muttering a prayer in Gaelic under his breath, words tangled with old fear and cold. Then, as slowly as it had come, the sound and presence withdrew. The faint tremor through the snow lessened. The slap of water against ice stilled. The smell faded. I rose at dawn with my memories already suspect, as if my mind had tried in the dark hours to file the experience under dream. Yet when we stumbled out, hoarse and sleepless, tangible marks awaited us. Between our camp and the crack, the snow bore a series of elongated depressions set at regular intervals, each almost the length of my forearm. They were shallow, no more than an inch deep, as though whatever had made them had distributed its weight over a broad surface. Within each depression, faint but undeniable, lay 4 curved scores at the foredge, like claw marks that had pressed through the crust and withdrawn. The line led straight to the crack, then stopped at the very lip. No sign of disturbance showed on the opposite side. "Seal that walks," murmured Desjardins. His voice shook. "It is an illusion," said Harrington, though his eyes refused to meet mine. "Wind scour. The drafts off the crack do odd things with drift." "Wind does not make claws," said MacLeod flatly. We argued then, as men will under strain, not truly with one another, but with the thing that had slipped into our ordered world. Harrington clung to reason as to a life raft, insisting upon natural causes, upon the treachery of senses, upon the dangers of a superstition in the harsh north. Desjardins, though he spoke less, grew more certain that the old tales had weight. MacLeod hovered between, his seaman's belief in omens warring with his soldiers' scorn for fear. As for myself, some last inner barrier had given way in that night. I could no longer pretend that we walked upon a passive stage. The ice had become populated with intentions beyond chart or compass. Yet I could not name them, nor fit them into any scheme I had learned in books. We broke camp in record time. Our plan to continue west along the edge was abandoned without formal discussion. Instead, we turned south, aiming for land and the safety of solid rock. It was a retreat, though no one used the word. The thing did not pursue us as a wolf pack might. Rather, it seemed to shadow our progress at a distance, a parallel but unseen. Some days we found no sign. On others, a faint trail of those strange depressions would cross our route and vanish into a field of pressure ridges. Once, at noon, when the weak sun brushed the horizon, and cast long, colourless shadows, we came upon a place where something had scored deep grooves into the side of a hummock, 6 parallel lines, each a hand's breadth apart, carved through 4 feet of wind-hardened snow and into the blue ice beneath. There was no drift anywhere nearby to explain that exposure. By degrees, our little company frayed. Harrington, who had once hummed snatches of sea songs as he walked, fell silent and gaunt, his gaze constantly sweeping the horizon. MacLeod's hands began to tremble when he lit the primus. He snapped at small things, yet at night I heard him speak softly to the remaining dogs, as if apologizing for the fate of their fellows. Desjardins grew remote, his eyes always listening inward as much as outward, as if he heard something just beyond the world of men. We had one further brush with whatever intelligence lay behind those tracks before we reached land. It was brief, but it sealed my knowledge that we had been observed, weighed, and, for reasons I dare not speculate upon, spared. A heavy fog fell upon us on the 21st of March, thicker than any we had yet seen, though the temperature remained far below freezing. It rolled across the ice in low billows, filling depressions, leaving the tops of hummocks clear so that they stood like islands in a grey sea. We roped ourselves together, man to man, each holding to the sleds, moving at a crawl. At one point, the line jerked. I heard a strangled cry behind me. The rope about my waist snapped taut, nearly cutting me in two. For a heart-stopping instant, I felt a pull not backward, but down, as if something had taken hold of the man behind and sought to draw him through the snow itself. Then there was a violent, shuddering release, and we all tumbled forward, gasping. When the fog thinned a little, we saw that MacLeod lay on his back, his parka torn open at the hem. The rope that had bound him had frayed in a manner I have never seen on hemp, as if something rough and wet had drawn it rapidly over a sharp edge. His boots were soaked to the ankle, though there was no open water nearby. "What happened?" I asked, hauling him upright. He swallowed, his face ashen. "Something took hold of my legs," he whispered, "from beneath, like being caught in kelp. But there is no sea here." He laughed then, a dry, humorless sound. We did not linger. That evening, as we made camp on a slight rise, the fog drew back like a curtain, revealing a distant line of dark against the sky. Land, the low coast of Baffin Island. We were not yet safe, but stone offered a solidity that ice had lost. In the days that followed, as we crossed the last miles of rough, shore-fast ice and scrambled up onto rock, the sense of pursuit ebbed. The nights grew quieter in a natural way. The dogs slept without their panic starts. No new marks greeted us in the morning. It was as if some boundary had been crossed, one not noted on any map, beyond which whatever lived between water and ice chose not to go. Our arrival at Pond Inlet in early April was noted with the usual economy. Men came to take our accounts, weigh our specimens, and copy my survey notes. Near Harrington presented his report to the local factor, and later, in due course, to officials farther south. It spoke of ice conditions, possible sites for whaling, the scarcity of certain game. Nowhere did the word Akhlut appear. I wrote my own account as required in careful ink, with maps and cross-sections. In it too there was no mention of strange tracks, sounds in the night, or half-seen forms at the floe edge. I told myself that such things had no place in a document meant to guide ships and merchants. I told myself that memory plays tricks under stress. I told myself that our honor required we not spread fear born of personal visions. Yet, privately, in a small notebook bound in worn black leather that I kept always on my person, I recorded everything as it had occurred, as best my hand could recall. There, in a less formal hand, I wrote the word Akhlut again and again, surrounded by question marks, underlined until the paper nearly tore. When we spoke of it among ourselves, which was rarely, we could not agree upon what we had seen, heard, or smelled. Harrington clung to the official version until his death in 1922, insisting to all who asked that the only thing that had truly menaced us was the ice itself. Yet in quiet moments, when he thought no one watched, I saw him touch the scar along his left calf where the rope had bitten, and his gaze would drift northward, unfocused. MacLeod returned to Nova Scotia. I visited him once, years later in 1920, on that stony farm he had always cursed. We sat in his kitchen, the smell of peat and boiled potatoes in the air, and for a time spoke of ordinary matters. Only as dusk fell, when the kettles simmered on the hob, did our talk circle, hesitantly, toward the north. "Do you ever dream of it?" I asked, more softly than I intended. His spoon paused halfway to his mouth. "The ice," he said. "The thing on the ice." He set the spoon down very carefully and folded his big hands. "I hear it," he said at last. "Not in dreams, when the wind is in the right quarter coming off the bay. There is a sound under it, like something dragging itself along gravel. Then the sheep startle, though nothing moves on the hill." He stood abruptly and opened the back door. The yard lay dark, the line of low stone wall barely visible. He peered out as if expecting to see a pressure ridge where his field ended. "Sometimes," he said, not turning, "I wake with wet on my feet. Only a little. As if I had stepped in a puddle, but the floor is dry." He shut the door and did not speak of it again. As for Desjardins, he went north once more with another party and did not return. They said his sled broke through young ice near Igloolik, that he and 2 dogs were lost before a rope could be thrown. Men called it mischance, the sort of tragedy that always hangs like a shadow over Arctic work. Perhaps they were right. Yet when I read the brief notice in a Montreal newspaper, I remembered the way his eyes had followed invisible lines on the snow, and I wondered whether something had merely reclaimed one of its own. I have tried, in the years since, to seek some rational anchor. I corresponded with oceanographers about unusual seals, with biologists about possibilities of unknown pinnipeds, with physicists about mirages and acoustic anomalies over ice. They replied with interest, sometimes with indulgent amusement, offering hypotheses that circled around pressure ridges, sound ducts, the tricks of light in polar air. None of them satisfied the part of me that had felt the heat of that bone carving against my chest, while something long and low turned its veiled head toward our canvas. There are ways in which that journey has never ended for me. In winter, when snow lies in the streets of Ottawa and the river freezes, I find myself avoiding the thin, shining places where water shows through. A sudden hush in the city's noise will make the hairs rise on my arms, transporting me back to that hollow where sound itself seemed to hold its breath. I keep a coil of rope by my bed, absurd as that seems, as if something might one night pull downward instead of under the door. Once, in 1919, I visited a small traveling exhibition of Arctic photographs in Toronto. Among the usual images of icebergs, igloos, and smiling hunters was one blurred plate taken from the deck of a whaler, showing the floe edge at dusk. Something long and dark lay along the ice-water boundary, more shadow than form, dismissible as a defect in the glass. Yet I stood before that photograph for a long time, my heart beating high, as if some part of me recognized a posture, a curve, a way of claiming the meeting of elements. In more prosaic hours, with documents spread before me and the map of Baffin Bay clear in my mind, I tell myself that what we encountered was simply the weight of the unknown, rendered into a shape our fearful senses could grasp. That the North, indifferent and immense, pressed upon our minds until we peopled it with a guardian, or a hunter of our own devising. It is a comforting thought, and I cling to it when reason demands. Yet comfort is a thin blanket against certain memories. I recall the way the dogs flattened themselves, not with the wild lunging of beasts scenting a bear, but with the resigned submission of prey that knows resistance is futile. I recall the unnatural band of warmth at my shins on a windless day, as if a great body had just passed unseen. I recall the smell that existed in a narrow line in empty air and vanished as soon as I stepped away. I recall my own boot soles, years later, leaving wet prints along a dry hallway floor in a government building, prints I hurriedly wiped away before any clerk might notice. And I recall, above all, that moment when I lifted the tent flap and saw the fog move with purpose around something that did not belong entirely to sea or land, which paused as if in thought and then turned as if acknowledging my attention. What name can a man give to such a presence that will not reduce it, lie about it, or make it seem more knowable than it was? Akhlut is as good as any, perhaps the only honest one, for it carries within it the understanding that some things are both and neither, that they travel roads we do not mark and obey laws not written in our books. In some forgotten drawer, amidst old charts and instruments whose brass has dulled, lies that small bone carving given to me by the hunter on the floe edge. The years have yellowed it. The shape is still ambiguous, seal and dog and something else. The surface is worn smooth where my thumb has passed over it in idle thought 1,000 times. Sometimes, on still nights, I take it out and hold it, feeling the faint warmth that seems always to cling to it, as if it remembered being pressed against beating flesh in a tent under northern stars. When I sleep, not often and not well, I do not dream of teeth or claws or the moment of our nearest peril. Instead, I see the long, clean line where the ice meets the sea, an edge that looks so simple on a chart. Along that boundary, in my mind's eye, something moves steadily and without haste, its form hidden just beneath a low strip of fog that never quite lifts.